What if I told you that the history textbooks we studied were essentially collections of fabricated stories? From the genius marketing tricks of monarchs to fake news that went viral long before the advent of the global network. Today we will dive into 30 of the most ridiculous, strange, and surprisingly persistent myths ingrained in the collective consciousness. Prepare yourself, this is going to be a painful realization. Fact number 1. The Great Wall of China, a deception of cosmic scale. Let's start with the colossal misconception. You have been told countless times that the Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure visible from the moon's surface. What an inspiring idea! The problem is that this is an absolute outrageous astronomical lie. It's impossible to see it not only from the moon, but even from a low Earth orbit with the naked eye. Astronauts unanimously confirm you're more likely to spot a major highway. The wall is incredibly long, but its width is only about 6 meters. Trying to see it from orbit is like trying to spot a human hair from a distance of 2 kilometers. This myth originated before the space age began because it sounded too spectacular to be questioned, and it is stuck with us forever. Fact number 2. Alligators in the New York sewers. The best horror movie plot that never happened. This classic of urban folklore claims that wealthy residents purchased baby alligators as pets, and when they grew too large, they simply flushed them down the toilet. These surprisingly resilient reptiles supposedly not only survived, but multiplied in the dark collectors, evolving into giant, blind, albino monsters. Fantastic for a horror film. But here's the kicker. There is zero evidence of this. And what exactly would they be eating down there? An eternal supply of lost jewelry and mutant rats? Over many decades, sanitation workers have not found a single colony of gigantic pale crocodiles. And they probably dreamed of finding at least one themselves, just to have a great party story. Fact number 3. The Illuminati. The most failed startup in history. The all-seeing eye on the dollar bill. A secret lodge of global elites ruling the world from their shadow headquarters. They control conflicts and the economy. And now, for the hilarious reality. The Bavarian Illuminati did exist, and they were a total failure. Founded in 1776, it was a small society of Enlightenment intellectuals whose goal was to promote the ideas of humanism and rationality. The all-powerful cabal supposedly ruling the world turned out to be a short-lived book club for intellectual nerds that was shut down by the authorities after only 10 years. They couldn't even organize activities outside of Bavaria, let alone take over the entire planet. Fact number 4. St. Patrick, Ireland's chief PR genius. Every March, the world celebrates St. Patrick's Day, honoring the legendary hero who supposedly drove all the snakes out of Ireland. There is one tiny, inconvenient detail in this story. There were never any snakes in post-glacial Ireland. The island was separated from the mainland by water long before reptiles could have slithered there. So what's the real story? This tale is a brilliant metaphor and a masterful public relations move. The snakes symbolize the pagan beliefs that Patrick systematically eradicated, replacing them with Christianity. He was a true PR master who turned routine missionary work into an epic battle with mythical monsters. He wasn't banishing actual crawling creatures. He simply conducted an extremely effective, metaphorical disinfestation of local cults. Fact number 5. Absinthe. The green fairy and the greatest hangover in art history. The drink of cursed painters and poets, famous for inducing vivid, wild hallucinations. It was widely banned due to its supposed psychoactive properties. This entire reputation is one giant drunken lie. The myth was cleverly fabricated during a brilliant smear campaign by French winemakers who were losing profits due to the green beverage's popularity. Absinthe does contain thujone, but you would have to die from alcohol poisoning at least 10 times over before you'd feel any psychoactive effect from the compound. The artists were not seeing amazing visions at all. They were just heavily intoxicated, writing terrible poems while being convinced of their own genius. Fact 6. Suicidal lemmings, Disney's cruelest hoax. We've all seen the footage. Hordes of lemmings, seemingly driven by a mysterious suicidal instinct, marching in formation toward a cliff and plunging into the water. It became a metaphor for blind, thoughtless conformity. But in reality, lemmings do not commit mass suicide. This myth was literally fabricated by the Disney studio. For their documentary film, White Wilderness, 1958, the film crew bought lemmings, brought them to a cliff overlooking a river, and literally herded them off the edge with brooms. They staged a natural phenomenon, pushing animals to their death for the sake of winning a prestigious award. Fact number 7. Diamonds, the biggest scam in marketing history. The belief that diamonds are extremely rare and possess incredible value is arguably the most successful commercial lie of all time. Diamonds are not particularly rare. In fact, they are one of the most common precious stones. Their price was artificially inflated by a single company, De Beers. In the 20th century, they established a global monopoly, stockpiling stones to control supply and drive up the cost. They then hired an advertising agency that gave the world the slogan, "A diamond is forever," and invented from scratch the modern tradition of giving a diamond engagement ring. This sparkling stone is not a symbol of eternal love, but a monument to marketing genius. Fact number 8. Sherlock Holmes never said his most famous line. Imagine Sherlock Holmes. He has just solved the most complex case and utters the immortal line, "Elementary, my dear Watson." This is the most recognizable quote associated with the character, yet he never once said it in the original works by Arthur Conan Doyle. Holmes did indeed say "elementary" and "my dear Watson," but the two phrases were never combined into one. The phrase gained popularity decades later through theatrical adaptations and early films. It became so widespread that it firmly embedded itself in our collective memory. This is arguably the greatest literary Mandela effect. Fact number 9. The flat Earth in the Middle Ages, a myth created to make ancestors look like fools. Central to the myth of the Dark Ages is the idea that during the Middle Ages, everyone, from peasants to monarchs, believed the Earth was flat. This is a pure lie, invented to make people of the past seem incredibly foolish. Educated people in the Middle Ages knew perfectly well that the Earth was a sphere. They had been studying the works of Greek scholars like Aristotle and Ptolemy for centuries. The real debates were not about the planet's shape, but about its size. The entire story of how Christopher Columbus supposedly proved the Earth was round was fabricated in the 19th century to present him as a lone genius challenging a superstitious and backward church. In reality, his opponents weren't afraid that he would sail off the edge of the world. They were quite rightly arguing that his calculations were disastrously wrong and that the planet was much larger than he estimated. Fact number 10. The Titanic was never called unsinkable. Central to the legend of the Titanic is the claim that the White Star Line company advertised the liner as unsinkable. This is the perfect ironic setup for a tragedy, but they never said that. This powerful but incorrect label was largely assigned by the press after the disaster to add more drama to the story and sell more copies. The company used much more cautious phrasing, calling the vessel practically unsinkable. The difference is huge. Journalists simply chose to drop the word practically because the headline "Unsinkable Ship Sinks" writes itself. Fact 11. Cleopatra, a Hollywood deception. Hollywood sold us the image of Cleopatra, a breathtaking Egyptian queen, seducing powerful Romans with her unearthly beauty. Time for corrections. First, she was not Egyptian. She was the last ruler of a Greek dynasty that had ruled Egypt for centuries. More importantly, all evidence indicates that she was not a conventional beauty. Coins minted during her reign depict a woman with a prominent nose and a sharp chin. Her real superpower was not her appearance, but her brain. She spoke multiple languages, was a brilliant political strategist, and had such charisma that two of the world's most influential men risked everything for her. Her weapon was intellect.
Fact number 12. Newton and the Apple, a children's story. This story is like a cartoon. Isaac Newton is sitting under a tree. An apple falls, hits him directly on the head, and eureka! He instantly grasps the concept of gravity. The thing is, the head bump is a later addition, meant to make the anecdote more entertaining. Newton himself recounted that he was simply looking out the window and saw an apple fall from the tree. This sight made him wonder why it fell straight down rather than sideways or up. This is what prompted his contemplation of universal gravitational force. The reality is far less comical. There was only a quiet moment of observation that led to one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs in history.
Fact number 13. The Iron Maiden, a prop from a horror chamber. A terrifying human-shaped sarcophagus studded with sharp spikes inside, designed to slowly pierce the victim. It is the calling card of medieval cruelty. Except it is a complete fake. There is no historical evidence of this device being used in the Middle Ages. In fact, it was fabricated in the late 1700s. Most likely, it was intended as a macabre art object for a museum to shock and entertain visitors. The Middle Ages had plenty of truly horrific torture methods. They did not need this tasteless Hollywood device invented centuries later for fun.
Fact number 14. Baseball, an invention to spite the English. Ask an American who invented baseball, and you will likely hear the name Abner Doubleday. It's a beautiful, purely American story, but it is a 100% patriotic fabrication. The myth was created by a special commission in 1907, tasked with finding a purely American inventor for the national sport to deny its obvious roots in the English game of rounders. They simply chose a famous deceased person and blamed him. America literally invented an inventor to win a cultural argument with the British.
Fact 15. General Tso's chicken, a dish General Tso never tasted. This sweet, spicy dish is the mainstay of any American Chinese restaurant menu. It is supposedly an authentic dish from the Hunan province in China. In reality, it is about as Chinese as a cheeseburger. The dish was invented in the 1970s by a chef in New York who wanted to create something appealing to the American palate. If you travel to Hunan province and ask for General Tso's chicken, you will be stared at as if you are insane. The real General Tso would be completely bewildered to learn that his legacy in America is sticky, battered chicken nuggets.
Fact number 16. The Trojan horse, the greatest spoiler in history. The Trojan horse is one of the greatest military ruses. The Greeks hide soldiers inside a gigantic wooden horse, leave it as a gift, the Trojans bring it into the city, and celebrate victory. A brilliant story, except it was almost certainly a metaphor, not a literal horse. Most historians believe the horse was likely a poetic description of a siege weapon, like a battering ram that finally breached the gates. Or perhaps it was an earthquake sent by the horse god Poseidon. It's just that the story from epic poems sounds much cooler than "they broke down the door with a large log."
Fact number 17. The 300 Spartans and their 7,000 friends. The story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae is the greatest tale of heroism. 300 muscular warriors valiantly resist a million-strong Persian army, a foundational myth of Western civilization. However, the story conveniently omits a few key details, namely the other 7,000 Greeks who were also there. The Spartans were not alone. They were part of a larger Greek alliance. Although the 300 Spartans were undoubtedly the elite core of the defense, they had huge support.
The narrative was later simplified to focus on the Spartans because, let's be honest, 7,300 Greeks fight valiantly doesn't sound as Hollywood-ready as 300.
Fact 18. The Mozart effect, a brilliant scam for parents. In the 1990s, the world was gripped by the Mozart effect. The idea was simple. Play Mozart's music for your child, and they will become smarter. Parents rushed to buy CDs, hoping to turn their toddlers into little geniuses. This entire craze was based on a gross distortion of a single, small 1993 study. The study didn't even involve infants. It was conducted on college students and only found a temporary 10-minute improvement in their spatial reasoning skills. Based on this one flimsy fact, a multi-million-dollar industry was born, proving that the fastest way to sell something is to tell parents it will make their children smarter. Fact number 19. The perpetual motion machine powered by an old man. In the early 1800s, an inventor named Charles Red Heifer amazed America with his incredible creation, a perpetual motion machine. This complex mechanism supposedly could run forever without an external power source. The skeptical engineer Robert Fulton exposed the fraud by breaking through some planks and discovering the real power source. It was a tired old man in a room upstairs, sitting on a stool, turning a crank with one hand while eating a piece of bread with the other. It wasn't perpetual motion. It was simply a low-paid worker. Fact number 20. Ancient statues as bright as a Christmas tree. When we think of Greek and Roman art, we imagine pristine, elegant statues of white marble. This image is a complete accident of history. In reality, these statues were originally painted in incredibly bright, gaudy, and sometimes tasteless colors. We are talking about neon red, blue, green, and yellow paints covering every inch, with painted irises and possibly even some tacky bronze accessories. The paint simply wore off over millennia. Renaissance artists who rediscovered these sculptures decided they must have been monochrome. The ancients were not minimalists. Fact number 21. Wild West duels are purest Hollywood fiction. Hollywood has drilled a clear picture into our minds. The Wild West, a lawless land where gunfighter duels in the middle of Main Street were commonplace. Two tough guys, a dusty road, the clock striking noon. It's a fantastically beautiful image, but it is almost entirely made up. Organized duels at high noon were incredibly rare. Most frontier towns were quite strict about weapons, often requiring newcomers to surrender their revolvers at the sheriff's office. Violent death more often occurred in a drunken saloon brawl or a dark alley, not in a fair showdown. The romanticized image of the gunslinger was created by dime novels and then Hollywood. Fact 22. The cowboy was not just Clint Eastwood. When you picture a cowboy, you probably see a rugged white guy like John Wayne. This image is a classic example of Hollywood's historical whitewashing. The reality of the American West was far more diverse. Historians estimate that up to 25% of all cowboys during the great cattle drives of the late 19th century were African American. Many of them were former slaves with incredible skills in handling horses and livestock. Furthermore, a huge number of cowboys were Mexican vaqueros, from whom the entire American cowboy tradition was essentially borrowed. The iconic American cowboy was not a single color. Fact number 23. Emperor Nero and his fiery concert. The legend says that while Rome burned in 64 AD, the cruel Emperor Nero stood on his balcony and heartlessly played the fiddle, the perfect image of a leader disconnected from the suffering of his people. This is a brilliant piece of slander, but it's impossible for two reasons. Firstly, the fiddle had not been invented yet. It would appear only 1,000 years later. Secondly, Historical evidence suggests that Nero was 50 kilometers outside the city when the fire started. He urgently returned to Rome to organize rescue efforts and spent his own funds on food and shelter for the displaced. The whole story was likely vicious propaganda spread by his political enemies.
Facts number 24. The Middle Ages were not an era of total filth. The Middle Ages have a reputation as an era of dirt and stench, where people lived without ever taking a bath. While their hygiene standards certainly weren't modern, this is a wild exaggeration. People did bathe. Most cities had public bathhouses, and bathing was a common social ritual until plague epidemics made people fear them. People used soap made from animal fat and ash and understood the need to wash their hands and faces. They weren't taking daily showers with scented gel, but they were not the walking biological hazards we imagine them to be. Fact 25. The average life expectancy of 30 is an outrageous statistical lie. We have all heard this grim figure. The average life expectancy in the Middle Ages was only 30 years. This number is a classic example of misleading statistics. The average was horribly skewed because of the incredibly high infant mortality rate. A huge number of children died before reaching the age of 1. If you managed to survive childhood and reach age 20, your chances of living to 60 or even 70 were actually quite high, provided you weren't killed in war. The world was not full of teenagers having midlife crises.
Fact number 26. The Spanish Inquisition was terrifying, but not the most terrifying. The Spanish Inquisition has a reputation as the most horrifying organization in history, but its cruelty was wildly exaggerated, mainly by Protestant propaganda from rival countries like England. In fact, the Inquisition's own rules limited torture sessions and required the presence of a physician. Secular courts at the time were often much crueler and applied torture far more frequently and with less regulation. It's strange to say, but if you were accused of heresy in the 15th century, you would probably have been better off in the hands of the church than the state.
Fact number 27. The Curse of the Pharaohs, a tabloid invention. When Howard Carter unsealed Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, he unleashed not only treasures, but also media hysteria about the curse of the pharaohs. Legend holds that anyone who disturbs the young king's rest is doomed to a mysterious and horrible death. The myth gained momentum when the expedition's sponsor, Lord Carnarvon, died a few months later from an infected mosquito bite. Newspapers went wild. But if you look at the numbers, it's utter nonsense. A study showed that the mortality rate among expedition members was perfectly normal. Howard Carter himself, the man who first broke the seal, lived for another 17 years. The curse was not real. It was simply a fantastic hoax cooked up by journalists to sell newspapers.
Fact number 28. A Message to Garcia. Corporate propaganda written in an hour. This short 1899 essay became a corporate and military Bible for an entire century. It tells the story of a heroic American soldier who, without asking a single question, delivers a message to the leader of the Cuban rebels. It was presented as the ultimate example of initiative. The problem is that the heroic core of the story is largely fictional. Author Elbert Hubbard wrote the piece in 1 hour to fill empty space in his magazine. He essentially invented a tool of corporate propaganda that deified unquestioning obedience, and generations of managers have since handed it out to their employees.
Fact 29. Ponce de Leon and his non-existent fountain of youth. The Spanish conquistador Ponce de Leon is forever linked to the obsessive search for the fountain of youth, a classic story of a fool chasing a dream through the swamps of Florida. But this entire narrative was attributed to him only after his death. In Ponce de Leon's own records, there is not a single mention of the fountain. He was in Florida for the same reasons as all other conquistadors: to find gold, seize land, and perhaps convert a few natives. The fountain story was added decades later by rival historians to portray him as a gullible old fool. He was a ruthless colonizer.
Fact 30. The Priory of Sion, the greatest hoax of the 20th century. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code introduced millions of people to the Priory of Sion, a secret society supposedly guarding the bloodline of Jesus Christ for centuries. The book presents it as a real, ancient organization. Without a doubt, this is one of the greatest historical hoaxes of the 20th century. The Priory of Sion was actually invented in 1956, not 1056. It was created by a French con man named Pierre Plantard, who desperately wanted to be descended from French kings. He forged a batch of documents, planted them in the French National Library, and tricked several authors into writing books about his fictional secret society. It was a complete fantasy that Dan Brown then turned into a global bestseller.
History is like a group project. Someone made things up, others never checked. Which funny fiction would you keep? Comment below. Your like, subscription, and comment will really help the channel get into recommendations.